Imagine watching two teams of engineers building a massive suspension bridge.
Yeah.
Right? Like from opposite sides of a vast river.
Oh, yeah. Like they're building out over the water, pouring concrete, securing all those cables.
Exactly. But right as they're about to connect in the absolute center, the steel beams they don't line up. They're off. And not by a mile, but by, just a few inches.
And in structural engineering, I mean, a few inches might as well be a mile.
Right.
You can't just bend the massive steel beams to make it fit. The math has to work perfectly from both sides, or the entire structure is unstable and, well, ultimately collapses.
Yeah, which is structurally terrifying if you're actually standing on that bridge. But it actually turns out to be a surprisingly perfect way to look at how we build, honestly, how we dismantle theological arguments.
It really is a great analogy for what we're talking about today.
So, welcome to today's deep dive. If you're new here, our mission is to take a stack of dense academic sources, articles, research papers, historical notes, and extract the core insights so you don't have to wade through the material yourself.
Because it gets incredibly dense very quickly.
Oh, absolutely. And today, we're zeroing in on a highly specific, heavily debated logical trap called the Islamic Dilemma. Or sometimes it's known as the Quranic Dilemma.
You're right. It's a formal logical argument that's utilized extensively in contemporary Christian-Muslim debates. The structure of this argument is what scholars call a text-immanent critique.
A text-immanent critique, meaning what exactly?
It means that instead of bringing in outside attacks, from external historical sources, it builds its entire case using only the internal claims of the opposing text.
I see.
Yeah, it basically forces the text to answer to its own internal logic.
Now, before we go any further, I really need to lay down a crucial disclaimer for you listening, because this deep dive covers some intense theological debates and religious polemics. We are entirely neutral here.
100%.
We are acting purely as your impartial guides to report on the arguments presented in our source material. And today we're specifically relying on Marc Bates's 2026 academic paper detailing this topic.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints of either Christianity or Islam.
Right. Our goal is simply to map out the architecture of this argument.
We're basically here to dissect the mechanics. We're going to break down the formal logic of this dilemma into its two distinct horns.
The two horns of the dilemma, right?
Exactly. And trace its historical roots over 1,000 years and figure out exactly why it's dominating street debates and digital platforms today.
Okay, so to understand any dilemma, we first have to understand the foundation it rests on, right? Like, why does this specific argument only use Islamic sources to make its point?
That's the crucial starting point.
Because the dilemma doesn't start with the Bible at all. It starts entirely inside the Quran, and it revolves around how the Quran views prior scriptures.
Yeah, the argument really draws its power from the fact that the Quran repeatedly, and I mean explicitly, affirms the divine inspiration, the historical preservation, and the binding canonical authority of the Hebrew Torah, or Al-Tawrat, and the Christian gospel, Al-Injil.
So it's not just a passing reference.
No, not at all. It positions itself as continuous with them.
Yeah. Bates highlights several specific passages to show how this works. For instance, Surah Al-Imran, verses 3 and 4, declares that the Torah and the Gospel were revealed aforetime as a guidance.
Right, aforetime.
And the Arabic phrasing used there, musadikun lima baina yadehi, literally translates to confirming that which is between its hands.
Which is such a vivid idiom.
It really is. It signifies the physical presence and immediate proximity of those prior scriptures. Like, it means the texts were right there, physically accessible, at the time of the recitation in the 7th century.
And the text actually goes much further than just acknowledging their physical existence. It commands strict obedience to them.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 47, the Quran commands the people of the gospel to judge by what is revealed therein. And then a few verses later, in verse 68, it tells them they have no ground to stand upon unless they observe the Torah and gospel.
Wow. It even directs Muhammad himself, right?
Right.
In Surah Yunus, verse 94, it says that if he's in doubt concerning what has been revealed to him, he should question those who have been reading the book before thee.
Exactly.
I was actually trying to think of a way to visualize this for you, the listener. It's a bit like, okay, imagine a new CEO taking over a major corporation.
Okay, I'm with you.
And this new CEO explicitly endorses the old employee handbook. Like, the CEO stands up in front of the entire company and says, that old handbook is brilliant. I demand that everyone strictly follow it. If you have questions, consult the old handbook.
Right, a total endorsement.
But and here's the catch. What happens if that old handbook fundamentally contradicts the new CEO's direct orders.
Well, then you end up with a severe crisis of authority. If the old handbook says never do X, and the new CEO says always do X, but the new CEO's primary claim to legitimacy is that the old handbook is flawless and must be followed.
The beams of the bridge don't align.
Exactly. The beams don't align.
Wait, so if the text commands 7th century Christians to read their Gospels, but those Gospels explicitly teach doctrines like the crucifixion,
Which they do.
then the Quran is basically validating the exact doctrines it's trying to disprove elsewhere.
And that contradiction is the actual engine of the Islamic dilemma.
Okay, this is fascinating.
How?
Because the Quran commands those 7th century Jews and Christians to follow the text in their physical possession. We have to look at what those specific texts actually said.
Yes, we have to look at the historical reality.
So let's break down the formal logic of this into its two distinct horns, which is the core focus of today's deep dive.
To set up the dilemma properly, we really have to establish the historical reality of the 7th century Mediterranean world.
Okay, set the scene for us.
The biblical texts that existed at that time, which we have documented continuously in ancient, massive manuscript collections like Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus, they explicitly affirm core Christian doctrines.
Right, there's no ambiguity there.
None. They overwhelmingly affirm the Trinity, the divine sonship of Jesus Christ, his substitutionary sacrificial death on the cross, and his bodily resurrection.
But the Quran explicitly denies those exact things.
It does.
Like Surah 4.157 denies the historical crucifixion of Jesus entirely, claiming it was only an illusion. Surah 9.3 explicitly denies his divine sonship.
Yeah.
And Surah 4.171 rejects Trinitarian language.
So here we have the contradiction just staring us right in the face.
Yeah.
And this is where the formal logic of the Islamic dilemma splits into those two horns we mentioned. Let's look at horn A first.
Lay it on me.
Horn A posits this scenario. If the biblical scriptures that the Quran affirms and commands obedience to are textually authentic, reliable, and preserved, then their core claims are true.
Meaning the crucifixion, the resurrection, the deity of Christ, all true.
Right. Consequently, the Quran's later denials of those specific events must be false. So if horn A is true, it undermines Islam's claim to be the final, infallible, corrective revelation.
Okay, let's unpack this. Horn A basically corners you into saying, if the Bible is right, the Quran is wrong.
That's the essence of it, yeah.
But, I mean, I feel like there's a really obvious escape hatch here.
Which is?
Couldn't an apologist just choose horn B? Like, couldn't they just say, sure, the physical texts exist, but the Christians and Jews completely altered them, so the Bible is actually wrong?
Well, horn B addresses that exact escape hatch.
Oh, really? Okay, let's follow that logic then.
If the biblical scriptures in the possession of 7th century Christians and Jews were textually corrupted, a concept known in Arabic as tarif al-Lafz, then the Quran is explicitly affirming, commanding adherence to, and directing its own prophet to consult corrupted, forged writings.
Oh, I see the trap now. If you claim the Bibles were already corrupted by the 7th century, then the divine voice in the Quran is commanding people to judge their lives based on a forgery.
Exactly.
Which implies logically that the divine voice didn't know it was a forgery.
Precisely the point of horn B. It concludes that this impeaches the wisdom, omniscience, and textual consistency of the Quranic voice itself.
Wow.
The logical conclusion of the dilemma as a whole is that whether the prior scriptures are preserved, which is horn A, or corrupted, which is horn B, the internal claims of the Quran fail to cohere.
But wait, wouldn't a historical Islamic scholar just say the Quran only meant to confirm the uncorrupted parts that were still left inside the Bible?
What do you mean?
Like maybe it was a mixed bag, some truth, some forgery, and the Quran was just pointing to the good stuff.
That anticipates exactly how Islamic scholars have historically tried to navigate this exact trap.
Okay, so I'm not crazy for thinking that.
Not at all. But to make that argument work, they had to radically change how they define the word corruption. We're moving from pure logic into historical theology here to see how the defense evolved over centuries.
Because to escape the two horns, you really have to redefine the terms. So let's trace this shift regarding the concept of tarif, or corruption.
Right. So in the earliest centuries of Islam, classical commentators like Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, who died in 923, they didn't actually argue that the physical text of the Bible had been altered.
Wait, really? They accepted the physical text?
Yeah, they focused on a concept called tarif al-mana, which basically translates to the corruption of meaning.
Corruption of meaning, like meaning bad translations. or just twisting the interpretation during a debate.
Exactly that. It was an accusation of misinterpretation. They argued that Christians and Jews were reading the text incorrectly or, deliberately concealing prophecies about Muhammad that were hidden in the text.
Right.
But crucially, it wasn't an accusation of wholesale physical alteration of the actual books. Early Islamic scholars recognized a substantial textual continuity.
But acknowledging that the physical text is intact, that's a huge liability, isn't it?
It's a massive liability.
Because if the physical text is intact, you are stuck right back on horn A. The physical text of the New Testament explicitly affirms Christ's deity. You can't just interpret your way out of the crucifixion if the text clearly says it happened.
And the Islamic scholars eventually realized that. As formal theological disputations intensified over the centuries, they realized Tarif al-Mana, corruption of meaning, just wasn't a strong enough shield.
Right.
This realization led to a massive shift, championed heavily by the Andalusian scholar Ibn Hazm of Córdoba. He died in 1064.
What did he do differently?
Well, he actually read the canonical Gospels, saw the stark contradictions with Quranic theology, and advanced the idea of Tarif al-Asl wholesale textual corruption.
So he just said the text itself is fake.
Yeah, he argued the physical words on the page had been maliciously changed and forged by Jews and Christians.
Okay, this brings up a major debate around a specific word in the Quran, right? Muhaymin, found in Surah 5.48. Modern polemicists often argue that Muhaymin means the Quran acts as a filter for these corrupted Bibles.
They do use that argument a lot today. But Bates's paper points out that in classical Arabic lexicography and early commentaries, Muhaymin carries the sense of a protector, a witness, or a trustworthy preserver.
Okay, let me make sure I have this straight. It's the difference between like a museum curator and a magazine editor.
I like that.
Yeah, so a museum curator protects an ancient painting, they're a preserver. Mm-hmm. But an editor takes a red pen to a manuscript, cutting out the bad parts, they're a filter. And the classical definition is the museum curator.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is how modern archaeological discoveries make that magazine editor argument, the idea of wholesale textual corruption, incredibly difficult to sustain.
Because we have the actual texts.
Right. We aren't just dealing with philosophy anymore. We are dealing with physical evidence dug out of the sand. We have the Chester Beatty Papyri, the Bodmer Papyri, early Syriac Peshitta translations.
Explain how those specific documents actually break the corruption argument.
Okay, think about the mechanism of forgery. To claim the Bible was corrupted to hide the truth of Islam, you would need to alter the texts everywhere.
Sure.
We have physical pieces of papyrus from Egypt dating to the 200s and Syriac translations from the 400s. These predate Muhammad by centuries.
Wow.
And when you compare those ancient documents to the Bibles that existed in the 7th century, they match functionally perfectly.
Oh, I see. Because the texts were already distributed across entirely different geographical empires, like the Byzantine Empire, the Sasanian Empire, the Aksumite Empire in Africa.
Exactly.
You couldn't just gather up thousands of manuscripts spread across 3 continents in different languages, change all the words about Jesus, and put them back without anyone noticing.
The geographical and linguistic spread makes a coordinated 7th century forgery historically impossible. The physical evidence proves the Bible of the 7th century is continuous with the Bible used centuries earlier.
Which means this debate over manuscripts and meaning isn't just dusty ancient history. It's incredibly relevant today.
Very relevant.
Because the internet basically took all this hidden manuscript evidence and made it universally accessible, which is probably why this dilemma is experiencing a massive revival. Let's actually look at the lineage of this argument, from the 8th century all the way to modern digital platforms.
Right, so the roots of this specific logical trap go way back to the 8th and 9th centuries. Following the Arab-Muslim conquests, Christian theologians living under Islamic rule had to articulate their faith within an Arabic-speaking environment.
That makes sense.
Early Syriac and Melkite apologists like John of Damascus and the author of the Apology of Al-Kindi, they recognized that Islamic claims against the Bible were constrained by the Quran's own deference to those prior scriptures.
They were basically the first ones to point out the bridge beams didn't align.
They were. They asked their Muslim opponents a very simple question. If the Quran affirms that Allah gave the gospel, and the Quran also affirms that Allah's words cannot be altered, how can you claim the gospel in our hands is a human fabrication?
That is a sharp question. And if you fast forward to the late 20th and 21st centuries, this ancient argument gets a major modern digital upgrade.
Oh, absolutely.
You have figures like Sam Shamoun, who began systematically cataloging all the Quranic verses, affirming the Bible and posting them online. You have Jay Smith using it in these fast-paced, highly aggressive street debates at Speaker's Corner in London.
Right.
David Wood popularized the actual name, the Islamic Dilemma, through his YouTube channel, Act 17 Apologetics. And authors like Christopher W. Frost write exhaustive books on it. But why is it so popular on platforms like YouTube or TikTok?
Well, Bates' paper provides a really balanced look at this in Table 1, assessing the argument's strengths and limitations. Its greatest strength in a digital, debate-heavy environment is that it operates strictly from the opponent's canonical premises.
It uses their own rules against them.
Exactly. It doesn't require a Muslim viewer to accept a Christian starting point. Furthermore, it is highly memorable. Horn A, horn B. It fits into a short video clip perfectly.
It's very clean logic. But the paper also notes it's not a perfect silver bullet. What are the limitations?
The primary limitation is that it is purely an internal refutational critique. Proving that an opponent's worldview contains a contradiction doesn't positively prove that your own worldview is true.
Right. It can dismantle a claim, but it doesn't build a new one.
Exactly. And there's also a major scholarly warning from Gabriel Said Reynolds about how we read these ancient texts.
Right, Reynolds. What's his pushback?
Scholars like Reynolds warn against imposing modern, strict binary logic, what they call a rigid Aristotelian dilemma on late antique homiletic texts.
Hold on. Homiletic, meaning the text was meant to be preached or spoken as a sermon, rather than read as a strict legal or mathematical contract.
Exactly the distinction. Reynolds argues that in the homiletic environment of the Quran, the word Injil, the gospel, might have been conceived as a singular heavenly archetype delivered directly to Jesus.
Kind of parallel to how the Quran was given to Muhammad.
Yes, exactly.
So when the Quran says the gospel, they might not be talking about the four historical gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, compiled by the early church at all. They're talking about a theological concept of a book, not the physical books on the table.
And if the two sides are operating with completely different definitions of what the book actually is, applying a rigid mathematical dilemma to the text might be missing the text's own self-conception entirely.
That is a really crucial point. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Is this dilemma just a logical gotcha game for aggressive street debates, a way to score cheap points in a YouTube comment section?
Some people definitely use it that way.
Right. Or does it serve a deeper purpose for the theologians actually using it thoughtfully?
For Christian theologians and serious apologists, the dilemma is not the final destination. It is merely a doorway to a much larger narrative. It functions as what Bates calls tactical clearance.
Tactical clearance. I really like that visual. It's like clearing out the brush and weeds before you can pour the foundation for a house.
That's precisely it. The instinctive Islamic charge in any dialogue is that the Bible is corrupted.
Right.
That accusation usually halts any theological dialogue immediately because, well, you can't discuss the text if one side thinks it's fake.
Obviously.
By using the dilemma to remove that charge of corruption, it clears the way for the apologist to introduce something positive. Specifically, the paper highlights the introduction of Walter C. Kaiser Jr.'s Promise Plan Theology.
Let's explain this framework because it's a massive shift in perspective. Promise Plan Theology views the Bible not as a bunch of disjointed books, but as an organic, progressive unfolding of God's redemptive promises.
It traces a single, unifying, divine promise, I will be your God, you shall be my people. This starts all the way back in Genesis 3.15, a passage known as the Protevangelium.
Wait, Protevangelium, that sounds intense. Let's break that down. Proto, meaning first, and evangelium, meaning gospel, the first gospel.
Exactly.
You're basically saying that instead of viewing the Bible as a series of disconnected software updates that replace each other, this view sees it as a single seed growing into a massive tree.
That is the perfect analogy. It tracks that single seed growing through the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant at Sinai, the Davidic covenant, and the New Covenant in Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Every branch is connected to the same trunk.
And according to this framework, that entire progressive organic tree reaches its absolute climax and fulfillment in Jesus the Messiah.
Yes.
This is a stark contrast to the Islamic narrative, because the Islamic narrative views Revelation as isolated, non-covenantal books. You get the Tawrat, the Torah, then you get the Zabur, the Psalms, then the Injil, the Gospel, and finally the Quran. And they replace one another through discontinuous ruptures. Like those software updates I mentioned, version 2.0 makes version 1.0 completely obsolete.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, The Islamic narrative attempts to sever the organic unity of the biblical covenants. But by restoring the reliability of those prior scriptures, using the Islamic dilemma, the Christian apologist can demonstrate that the New Testament doesn't abrogate or replace the Old Testament.
It fulfills it.
It fulfills it.
The tree bears fruit.
Meaning the blood sacrifices in the Torah aren't mistakes or forged texts. They're seen as divine typology pointing directly to Jesus as the ultimate substitutionary sacrifice.
And this reveals the ultimate goal of the dilemma for the apologist. It isn't just about winning a logical argument over manuscript transmission. The goal is to force a fundamental reevaluation of the person of Jesus Christ.
A paradigm shift.
Exactly. The aim is to shift the view of him from a Unitarian prophet whose mission ended in a substitutionary illusion.
Right. The idea in Surah 4.157 that someone else was magically made to look like Jesus and died in his place. Right. To shift from that to the eternal Word made flesh who actually bore the wrath of God and rose victoriously.
Wow. It's taking a very sharp logical trap and using it as a doorway to present a unified, uncorrupted Word of God. We've covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started by looking at the Quran's own internal claims affirming the physical presence of prior scriptures. We broke down the formal logic of the dilemma, the stark contradiction between what 7th century Bibles actually taught regarding the Trinity and crucifixion and what the Quran claims they taught.
And that led us right to the two logical horns.
Right. Either the Bible is preserved and the Quran is wrong, or the Bible is corrupted and the Quran commands obedience to a forgery.
We then traced how Islamic defense strategies evolved, moving from early scholars arguing about the corruption of meaning to later scholars arguing for wholesale textual corruption just to avoid the trap.
A defense that modern manuscript discoveries, like those ancient papyri, make very difficult to uphold.
Very difficult.
And finally, we saw how modern apologists use this argument in the digital age, not just as a gotcha, but as tactical clearance to introduce a canonical, promise-planned biblical theology. It's really fascinating intersection of pure logic, ancient manuscript history, and deep theology.
It highlights how ancient texts are never truly read in a vacuum. They are constantly interacting with and being tested by the texts that surround them.
Which leaves us with a profound, lingering question to ponder as we draw this deep dive to a close. If historical religious texts are judged not just by what they claim about themselves, but by what they demand of other older texts, how does that change the way we read all foundational documents?
It suggests that history creates an inescapable web of cross-verification. No text can stand entirely alone. They are all pulling on one another, creating tension.
They really are. And if you're building a bridge across history, you better make sure the beams align perfectly from both sides. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.